Can we classify the left-wing France Unbowed and the far-right National Rally as the same?
We have unnatural alliances at both extremes.
If the extremes were to win these elections, it would be a disaster for French lives.
Can we compare the left or the far left with the far right, or compare the far right with the far left? The question is quickly answered, but we must ponder the issue. Note that in this video we are going to discuss a rather sensitive political issue. Far right and far left are tough subjects. Neutrality doesn't exist, and even if we try to aim for it, we'll never be completely neutral. What we can do is try to be of good faith and intellectually honest. It's up to everyone to question what is said on this video and to use their critical thinking. Before asking whether France Unbowed is far left, whether the National Rally is far right, and whether we can equate the two, we need to start with a brief history of what the left and the right are. What is the left and the right? Indeed, the left-right political divide today is largely centered on these particular issues. Very schematically, the left, equality, society, and rights. On the right, freedom, individuality, merit. But it wasn't always like this. The left and the right began with the revolution in August 1789. King Louis XVI gathered the Estates General to find a solution to the economic crisis which had become a political crisis. The Estates General formed a National Assembly to turn France, which was still an absolute monarchy, into a constitutional or parliamentary monarchy, like in England. The question that arose was the role of the king. In the year 1789, they were not at all ready to form a republic, and even less decapitate the king. Some wanted to leave to the king significant powers, notably the right of veto, meaning the ability for the king to nullify a law passed by the assembly. Others believed that the king should play a smaller role, thus not having veto power, or only a temporary veto, and believed that the National Assembly represents the people, and should have the final say. This is clearly as much a question of political philosophy as it is of power and wealth. When it is time to decide the king's power, those who supported the right to veto were asked to stand on the right side, and those who opposed it to stand on the left, and that is the origin of the left and the right. In the late 19th century, it will change. Marx came along, the labor question arose, and alongside social issues, the idea of a republic began to develop. The left-right divide will change. Monarchists on the right, Republicans on the left. In 1870, a double crisis emerges. First, the collapse of the empire. Napoleon III is defeated at Sedan, and the Paris Commune, which, to oversimplify, is a popular uprising against power which led to the establishment of a direct democracy for 2 months. For many reasons, at that moment, France became a republic, and monarchists will accept the idea of a republic, but only temporarily. They will realize that it's not the chaos they had imagined before. Bit by bit, left and right, we keep the republic. Here again, the left-right divide shifts. On the right, those who want a conservative, liberal republic, the former monarchists, and on the left, those who want a social republic with rights for workers. We can already see how the left-right divide is starting to resemble what we have today. And then, there's one last thing that solidifies this divide. The Dreyfus affair, named after the captain falsely accused of treason because he was Jewish. It's the 1890s. Everyone will quickly realize Dreyfus is innocent. The country will split in two. Those on the left, the Dreyfusiards, defend Dreyfus's rights. It's at this moment that the League of Human Rights is created. And those on the right, anti-Dreyfusiards, say state reason is more important than one man's fate. All of this against the backdrop of anti-Semitism. Very roughly once again, these are the two axes defining the left-right divide in the late 19th century. On the left, social rights and the defense of fundamental freedoms. On the right, economic liberalism and national interest. So this historical reference shows that the left-right divide is far from fixed. It evolves and shifts over time. Incidentally, it's worth noting that when it comes to political systems, parliamentary monarchy, republic, social republic, economic issues, shorter working hours, social rights, and societal issues, death penalty, women's rights, LGBTQ rights, paradoxically, it's often the left that succeeds. And to those who say it was Simone Weil who was on the right, who passed the abortion law, that's true. But the fight for abortion rights had already existed on the left for a long time. Back to the main point. What you need to see is that left and right are not two teams or platforms, but a divide. There will always be left and right. If we eliminated everyone on the right tomorrow, well, within the remaining half, there would still be a left and a right. Political ideas form a spectrum. Left and right are just ways to categorize people based on a few core values. And like any spectrum, there's an infinite variety of shades. Which brings us to our French elections. Where exactly do France Unbowed and the National Rally stand on this spectrum? Are they at the extremes? Can we definitively say that the National Rally is far right? So the first question that comes up is, by what criteria do we decide that a party or ideas are extreme?
Now, in the policies they aim to implement, Europe's far-right parties propose extreme measures.
What now?
There's nothing further on the right. Reserving social aid for French citizens, I find that extreme.
Laurent Geoffrin's definition is troubling. Reinstating the wealth tax isn't that extreme. Retire at 64 years old isn't that extreme? Isn't having road rules isn't that extreme? It's totally subjective. So, to decide if France Unbowed is truly far left, we need somewhat more objective criteria. First, there's the official classification. The Interior Ministry classified France Unbowed as left, not far left. The Supreme Court confirmed it. In its decision on March 11, 2024, it deemed that France Unbowed, like the communists, are part of the left bloc. The Ministry of the Interior and the Supreme Court, which are not exactly known as communists' bastions with hats and zipper shoes, say France Unbowed is not far left, just left-wing. That is the first criteria. Second, university research. What do the political scientists and historians say about it? Those who have studied the subject for 30 years. Historian Serge Cosseron, expert on the far left, gives a definition. The far left consists of anti-capitalist groups known for rejecting established institutions. It's quite simple. If we follow this definition, workers' struggle is far left. New anti-capitalist is far left, not France Unbowed. Its leader, Jean-Luc Mélenchon, is a first-class jurist. He won't lead the dictatorship of the proletariat. He aims for a sixth republic through existing institutions. His revolution is civic and through ballots, not violence.
Have you chosen elections over revolution ultimately? Is that your decision?
Well, for me, it's compatible. I think like in South America, as you'll see in Tunisia, because what people in Tunisia want is elections.
For my part, I have not stopped saying it. I propose a calm, positive solution, which would be to call a constitutional convention where citizens would rewrite, France would reshuffle, and a new constitution would be created.
So France Unbowed, even if it criticizes the institutions, plays by their rules. And as strange as it may seem, they're about as revolutionary as we are pro-cyclists. They just talk a bit loud. They are radical reformers, yet reformers. Third point, the platform. That would take a long time. Let's take an example that makes France Unbowed seem far left. Economic questions.
What are they aiming to do? Always more spending. Stimulating activity through demand by artificially supporting purchasing power, which will increase the debt.
Is France Unbowed's economic plan far leftist? Whether we find it doable or not, we need to be serious for a moment. In fact, it just needs to be compared to the joint program of François Mitterrand and the communists in 1974.
We still have a program that is significantly more radical than the one François Mitterrand had in the 80s.
Upon assuming power in 1981, the left-wing government nationalized the whole banking system. It's hard to imagine Jean-Luc Mélenchon proposing to nationalize BNP Paribas, Bank, Natixis, everything. In 1981, the socialists nationalized half of the industry. Once more, it's hard to imagine France Unbowed nationalizing Total Energies, Bugatti, and all the others. Back then, the left introduced 39-hour work weeks, a fifth week of paid leave, retirement at 60, a 10% minimum wage increase, higher pensions, and the wealth tax. The platform was much farther to the left than that of France Unbowed today. No rational person would ever think to say that President Mitterrand was far left. Of course, the economic context is different now. But when you look at the France Unbowed program, retirement at 60, a 10% increase in the minimum wage, reinstating the wealth tax, you might not agree with it. But it's not war communism at all. It's very classically left-wing. Now, the issue of anti-Semitism often justifies the term extreme. Jean-Luc Mélenchon has been criticized for his positions, like his critique of the Council of French Jewish Institutions, for several years now.
If you ask the right person, I oppose all forms of communitarianism. The Council of French Jewish Institutions is particularly aggressive, with communitarianism ambitions I can't stand.
For example, participating in protests where anti-Semitic remarks were made at the end of the march. Then comes October 7th. Mathilde Panot won't call Hamas a terrorist group, preferring to say they commit war crimes.
It's the armed wing that is now responsible for war crimes.
Since accusations of anti-Semitism have poured.
The leader of the Unbowed has crossed the threshold into clear anti-Semitism.
After persistently refusing to label the horrific acts of Hamas as terrorism,
Mr. Mélenchon has become the spokesperson for Hamas in France, representing their interests and views.
Jean-Luc Mélenchon and France Unbowed seem more guilty of provocation and seeking attention, unwilling to lose face at any cost, than of anti-Semitism, which is evident. At France Unbowed, no one has ever been convicted of anti-Semitism, nor has anyone even been charged, which is a fact. We can't say the same for everyone. In the media, they talk about an atmosphere of anti-Semitism.
This atmosphere of anti-Semitism exists, spreads, and leads to anti-Semitic acts, which is concerning.
So we agree, but it appears to us that the accusations of anti-Semitism against France Unbowed are based on things not very solid. Let's imagine a member of France Unbowed is found guilty of anti-Semitism. Does this imply that the entire party shifts to far-left politics? Because that's our topic when Jacques Chirac made openly racist remarks.
The French worker who sees on his public housing floor next to him a family crammed in with a father, 3 or 4 wives, and around 20 children. If you add to that the noise and the smell, the neighboring French worker goes insane.
Did they say Chirac's party was racist overall? Let's be serious. Let's close this important parenthesis on anti-Semitism now. France Unbowed. One might think their economic program is unworkable. One might think they're angry. One might think they're always in conflict and that it tires everyone. And one might even think they had a poor attitude in describing the attacks of October 7th. In our view, to classifying the entire party as far left shows a rather limited sense of political analysis. Is the National Rally far right? Of course, National Rally leaders deny it.
Once again, we say we are not a far-right movement.
No, we are not racist. No, we are not far-right. Being far-right is very clear. It is a party that rejects parliamentarism.
Let's review our criteria. The official ranking, the Interior Ministry, and the Supreme Court classify National Rally as far-right. That's one element. Second criterion, what researchers say about it. We can consider there are 2 main criteria for the far-right. Nativism, rejecting freedom. First, nativism. The idea is that we are at home.
For foreign offenders, automatic deportation to the border.
Society is based on ethnicity, race, or nationality and must be defended. Hence the rejection of immigration or Islam. Hence national preference. Hence a conception of French identity that excludes. There is us, and there is what is not us. Then the rejection of democracy. So, we often tend to think that democracy is elections and collective ways of designating power. We ask this. A country with free elections, but where Jews would be persecuted and chased, would it still be a democracy? Of course not. To have a democracy, first, the people must exercise power, and second, there must be a defense of fundamental rights and the rule of law. That's why it's not enough to support a parliament, the republic, or elections to avoid being far right. Of course, there are far-right movements that also reject elections, like the fascisms of the 20th century or neo-fascist parties like Golden Dawn in Greece. But it doesn't stop there. We must defend basic rights. That's where it gets tough. There are many constitutional principles or fundamental rights that the far right, let's say, nibbles at, and sometimes outright rejects. Equality, separation of powers, due process, freedom of worship, abortion rights, and more. Second criterion to qualify a far-right party is rejecting this part of democracy. And let's add, it's the most important. There are a whole lot of other criteria that research has identified, such as the notion of a societal decline. It was better before, the idea that there are pests and undesirables. At the bottom, the immigrants. At the top, the elites. There's a direct link between savior and people. All this constitutes a collection of intellectual trends that have long been studied by experts on the far right. The far right, historian Nicolas Lebourg says, is not a platform, but a value system. The criteria just mentioned, nativism, valuing us against others, attacking democracy, can apply just as easily to the National Rally as to Donald Trump, even though their platform are quite different.
When Mexico sends its people, they're sending people that have lots of problems, and they're bringing those problems with us. They're bringing drugs, they're bringing crime, they're rapists, and some, I assume, are good people.
That's why almost all political scientists classify the National Rally as far right. Third, the platform. So the big thing that stands out when viewing the National Rally's plank is the proposals that oppose several principles in what we call the block of constitutionality, which are the core foundations of the Republic. We have already named some, but let's take the biggest one, the principle of equality. Whether it's national preference, expelling dual citizen who committed a crime, or more recently banning dual citizen from certain public service positions, it clearly goes against the principle of equality, which is the absolute foundation of the French democracy.
Not the difficulty posed regarding certain individuals by the ban on dual citizen. Finally, can we imagine French-Russian dual citizens working at the Ministry of the Armed Forces today?
This proposal, which may be valid or at least debatable, creates 2 categories of citizens. Those who can access governmental jobs, and the others, those who can be expelled for committing a crime, and the others. Fourth, the story. Before being called National Rally, Marine Le Pen's party was called National Front, founded in 1972 by Jean-Marie Le Pen and Pierre Bousquet. Pierre Bousquet, who filed the party's statutes and was its treasurer for 10 years, was a Waffen-SS of the Charlemagne division, the one that defended Hitler's bunker until the very end. Saying that the National Rally was founded by an SS is factual. The National Rally has always been troubled by this topic. It never rejected this part of history. It never said, we disagree with that. The anti-Semitic or racist views of Jean-Marie Le Pen are really hard to ignore when judging if the National Rally is far-right or not.
I do not say that gas chambers did not exist, but I think it is a minor detail in the history of World War II.
And Mr. Brule, too.
Oh, yes. That does not surprise me. Listen, we will make a batch next time.
So by at least 4 criteria, we can call the National Rally far-right. Adding that calling this party far-right does not mean all its voters are racists. It is just a political classification on the left-right spectrum. Now we can see more clearly about left, and far-right. The other day, it was said that for about 10 years, this shrinking of Republican runoff strategy, especially on the right, has been led in public debate by the idea that the far left and the far right is the same. It's a political theory called the horseshoe theory, attributed to philosopher Jean-Pierre Fay. The left-right divide is not a straight line with far left, left, center, right, far right, but a horseshoe, where the extremes almost touch each other. The idea is that the far left and far right both lean towards authoritarianism and totalitarianism, and are closer to each other than the center. It's an idea already found in Germany's past. Some people at that time thought there would be political ties between communists and Nazis. So, this horseshoe theory, it's based on very little, but it appears regularly, and for 10 years it has gained in acceptance. We observe it, for instance, with the use of the term populisms. Before it was just populism, now it's populisms, grouping right-wing and left-wing populism together as one. And some do not hesitate to equate Jean-Luc Mélenchon with Nicolas Dupont-Aignan, or even Donald Trump, or Viktor Orban.
On the left, Jean-Luc Mélenchon. On the right, Nicolas Dupont-Aignan. 2 styles, 2 political stances, but one common point. They bring back a certain type of populism. Béatrice Gellot, Marc Félix.
What is the common thread among the various populist candidates, whether it be Trump, Mélenchon, Marine Le Pen, Viktor Orban, or the leaders in Poland?
We remember, for example, Plantu's drawing that caused a stir at the time, depicting Jean-Luc Mélenchon and Marine Le Pen with an armband in 2011, comparing their speeches and ideas. And recently, we talk more about the extremes than populisms.
Against extremes, we alone carry a project of coherence, clarity, and responsibility.
And everyone followed.
I fight to prevent the extremes to win.
By extremes far right and far left.
Could lead to a head-on clash of extremes?
Even Kylian Mbappe ends up talking about the extremes.
Today we can clearly see that the extremes are at the gates of power. That's why I'm calling on all young people to go vote and to truly recognize the importance of the situation.
This shows how the idea has taken hold. Clearly, extremes aren't part of the Republic.
Mr. Mélenchon will not win. He had an anti-Republican attitude for a long time. It's unacceptable.
To me, Jean-Luc Mélenchon has set himself apart from the Republican coalition.
I think the Greens and the far left have completely exited the Republican framework.
So, for years, the idea that the extremes are equal has gained ground. The far left, the far right, it's the same. And once this has been said for long enough, it's hard to take it back.
We spent the campaign saying there were 2 extremes. There would be only one after the first round. I believe we would, in truth, lose the French people.
And this is where we stand now. To conclude, we believe that equating France Unbowed with the National Rally perpetuates 2 mistakes. The first is believing France Unbowed is far left. The Ministry of the Interior, political science researchers, studying their plank, tells us they are classically left-wing. They are loud, but they shout classically left-wing things. The second mistake is believing that, at their core, France Unbowed and the National Rally are the same. It seems we can say, fairly objectively and without taking a stance, that the National Rally makes proposals, perhaps legitimate, but ones that contradict a number of fundamental principles of our society. The first being the principle of equality. It's not an opinion, it's legality. France Unbowed, no. We can criticize them for having an unworkable economic program, sure. We can fault them for constantly stirring up controversy. We can even reproach them for completely mishandling their response to the events of October 7th. But at no time has France Unbowed made any proposal against the principles of equality, against the rule of law, or anything that forms the basis of the Republic. So when we use the term the extremes, putting France Unbowed and National Rally back to back, it seems to us to be a rhetorical device to disqualify them. There is a bit of what we call the ambiguity fallacy, using the same word for two very different political realities, and a bit of guilt by association. It's associating France Unbowed with a party that has long been a repellent, and there are some ad hominem arguments, classifying France Unbowed as an unreasonable party to avoid discussing their proposals. Obviously, by mirror effect, those who are not the extremes are reasonable.
Listen, I simply cannot conceive of even a moment's victory for the National Rally or the far left. There exists a central bloc, a bloc of reason to which I proudly belong.
Using the extremes in the plural seems to us a rather questionable intellectual honesty. What's more concerning is drawing political conclusions from it, even if we put both extremes together. One is 10 seats away from power, the other is not. In this context, can we afford to sit back and ignore the difference? Everyone must form their own opinion. Ours is already made. We remind you that we created in the French language a critical thinking course with political examples and more, to sharpen your mind, challenge others' views, and your own thinking. It's on espritcritique.fr, and it's pay what you want. You can also support us on Typee occasionally, and even more wonderfully regularly. This political period has been somewhat rough. So we will take a short break, and we'll see you very soon on our Instagram for short formats, and on YouTube for our long formats. See you soon on Esprit Critique.